Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Guy Rowson. I have the privilege of being the inaugural president for IAMCP in Australia and New Zealand. Today we're going to be running through just briefly what is IAMCP, a little bit about the new chapter and our committee to form our new board. And then as you'll see on the screen, we've got QPB Q2 session. So we're really pleased to have Lenovo here, and I'll introduce Edith and James shortly. That's going to be followed by three fantastic presentations. We're very privileged to have Patrick from Microsoft in New Zealand here to talk about Azure Arc and Azure Lighthouse and what's emerging there. Robert Crane, based in Sydney, Australia, from CIAOPS. He's going to be sharing some insight into security for 365 and Azure and the steps we're taking. And the learned David Soldani is joining us from UNSW, and he's talking about the 5G opportunity for cloud computing. Through this session, please find the chat on the Teams, and if you throw in questions, Eddie's there, and a couple of others are going to help moderate those questions. We will do a panel Q&A at the end. In between each of the sessions, we're going to do a brief couple of minutes of questions so people can take a break as we go through, because it is 2 hours. Be aware at the end, if you registered via the link that's there and you're on the Social 27 platform, there is a virtual lounge that's running actually for 24 hours, because this event is running around the clock. It started at 7 a.m. PDT time, so Pacific time in the US, which was about our midnight, and it's running all the way around the clock until their morning, our early morning, their late afternoon, where Gabriella Schuster and Dan Truitz are going to be doing a keynote at the end. So I'll move on to what is IAMCP. So the International Association of Microsoft Channel Partners is the largest association of Microsoft partners in the world. It was established in '94. It operates in 40 countries with around 100 chapters. I won't read this word for word, but essentially, as a community, it's about collaboration. It's about strength in numbers. It's about lifting each other up. But in particular, it's about working together. And there was a study, I think it was Gartner performed, showing that members had delivered over $10 billion in partner revenue that would not have occurred without the association existing and partners working together. So IAMCP did have a false start in Australia probably 10 years ago. As I said, I was at Inspire in 2019. I was lucky enough to be invited as a guest to attend the 25th celebration there at Mandalay Bay. It was a very warm and inviting community, and I said, well, why isn't this in Australia? And, you know, a year later, with the great help of Ulysses, who's the international membership chair, I've met a wonderful bunch of people, including Eddie, including Sarika, Suresh, who is the APAC president, who may join us, Mikhail, who's the EMEA president, a very inclusive and a very collaborative community that I'm pleased to be a part of and hopefully championing here. So IAMCP in Australia and New Zealand, as I said, I'm very proud and privileged to be the leading or inaugural president. I'm also part of the APAC board. IAMCP is a three-tier organisation. There's the global organisation, of which Sarika, as listed down the bottom, is the current president. And then there is three tiers, being the Americas, EMEA and APAC. Along with me, we've formed a committee of 9. I saw Patrick's on the call with us from Burger IT in Victoria. He's actually based in Phillip Island, but commutes regularly to Melbourne, so he shows that teleworking does work. He's been doing it for years, and he successfully supports many, significant organisations, including AFL football clubs, things like Crime Stoppers, and some amazing organisations. Our treasurer, Jason Weaver, is a certified accountant. He's a Kiwi that made the move to Queensland and operates a business across the Pacific. Zeal Systems is an ISP delivering some ERP systems. Ashley Vogstad from Transcend is based in New Zealand, but through the pandemic has been living in Canada, which was her hometown before she made New Zealand her home. Ashley brings in some really great digital marketing experience and has a deep relationship with Microsoft, which is great. Maria Armstrong is the current CEO of SMB IT Professionals. She is also an independent consultant under her own right as Accelerate 9. Nathaniel Wallace of Wallace Computers is based in Western Australia. Nathaniel lives in Derwallinu, and he brings the rural insight to the market for us, running an MSP there that looks after, a local government market in a weighted way, but generally across commerce. Richard Giddy, some will know from Storagecraft as a vendor. He now runs and owns a business called Active Image and is based in Sydney. Ray de Klerk, who's with us on the call, welcome Ray, is a representative of ACE Training, a Microsoft certified training organisation based in New Zealand. And then last but not least is Tony Pastore. Tony has a long history in working in major corporates and currently works with UST Global, which is an Indian-based SI with some business here in Victoria and Sydney. So that's a quick rundown and introduction to the team. By all means, if you know any of them, reach out or find us on LinkedIn. We currently have a page on LinkedIn where we are seeking to engage with the community and build this up. Today is the first day and the first session of IAMCP in Australia and New Zealand. I'm really pleased to be introducing Lenovo as our inaugural sponsor. I'm delighted to have them on board. Edith and James are here with me in the room, and so I'd just like to welcome them to the community and say thank you for hosting us.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for having us today, and we are very pleased to support IAMCP today, and we definitely look forward to the future partnership. We're going to start from ANZ and hopefully expand to other regions globally.
Yeah, and that's wonderful, Edith. So Edith is leading global SaaS here. I did have up on the screen and took it down. Lenovo obviously are a powerhouse in the PC market, in terms of devices, tablets. A lot of people don't know they also acquired Motorola, so they're now the third largest mobile phone handset provider in the world. I was blown away, Edith, by the statistics that I think, for example, in Japan, one of your territories, you still have 60% of the desktop market, or the personal device market, which is incredible. We're incredibly pleased that you've joined us on this journey, and really looking forward to growing that. So that's the introduction. I'll quickly jump back to my slides here. There are a number of other sponsors for IAMCP globally that are making this event happen. Pax8 is the diamond sponsor. I won't read all of them. We're really happy that they're helping make this happen I think it's a 33-hour round-the-clock event. Without any further ado, I want to step into our first speaker, Patrick. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you take the stage and tell us about what's new with Azure in the region and a little bit about Arc and Lighthouse.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Just want to check you can see my screen.
Sure can.
Got the right slide up, the right slide deck. So you've got the Azure Hybrid slide.
We do.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining. I appreciate your time and interest in today's event. It's great to see this community building and seeing everyone come together. So big thanks to the whole team here. It's fantastic to see. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Paddy Quesnel. I'm currently the Asia Pacific Azure Hybrid Product Lead. I was, up until recently, the New Zealand Azure Lead, and just picked up this new role about 3 months ago. and has finally managed to offload that to the new chap called Zeus. And so my role was newly created because of Microsoft's focus around hybrid. And while we've sort of, as an organisation, sort of had pretty strong hybrid offerings through networking, DevOps, and of course our Azure Stack portfolio, we felt that we wanted to try and really get after this part of the market where, based on a lot of the data we were seeing from various, I guess, analysts and houses, that hybrid and multi-cloud was becoming more of a reality than ever. So I'm just going to sort of touch you through on a couple of points, and then sort of show you some of the products that have launched and gone live and what's coming, and how that probably provides a bit of value for you as partners in the community, particularly if you're managing customers who are running on premises, as well as maybe Amazon and Google and also Azure. So how you can sort of maximize that opportunity for you as partners. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. If you've got any questions, just whack them in the chat, and we'll probably take some at the end, I think was the plan, wasn't it? Oh, yeah, cool. So basically, we're seeing that hybrid and multi-cloud is definitely a strategy, and I think, while we'll always be pushing public cloud as the best of breed and best practice in terms of getting the most for your organisations to modernise and innovate, the reality is that not everything can go to public cloud, particularly legacy applications, and there could be stepping stones for organisations to take as they work through that journey. And what we're seeing is sort of this is some research out of sort of a bit more local in terms of APJ coming out of IDC, which really says that there's probably a percentage of the market that will go into sort of a single cloud environment, and then the rest are going to go to multi-cloud / hybrid cloud, and their biggest challenge is interoperability and management of those environments. And they've got pretty common sort of areas around disaster recovery and security and management and application performance, etc., that they're worried about, and that's why they're going down that track. So all of this points in the right direction in terms of how Microsoft is thinking about hybrid and going forward. And what I'm trying to urge everyone in the market to think about is Microsoft isn't thinking about this as an or solution to public cloud. It's part of the right cloud solution for customers. So it's moving away from pushing really, really hard on just public and saying, okay, what's working? Sitting down with partners and with their customers, and actually realizing, and choosing what the right cloud options are for organizations as they evolve. And that's primarily because environments are evolving quickly, but also running hundreds or thousands of apps across lots of different infrastructure, and whether we like it or not, across different public cloud providers as well. So that's the reality. So when we looked at that, we sort of thought about, well, how can we meet the market in that sense and be a little bit more customer centric, I suppose. Not saying that we weren't, but I think what we're bringing to the table now certainly meets that. And then, of course, we listened to a lot of what you as partners were saying out in the wider community. And this, I probably wouldn't say that hybrid necessarily causes pain for partners, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. We're hearing sort of like certainly the managing customers across multiple estates is complex. And when you start adding in edge devices, various public clouds and various on-premises, and then you take in other solutions from various hardware providers, then it all of a sudden becomes a myriad of complexity and, as I said, interoperability challenges. And of course, then you get into sort of different tooling and different expertise, trying to separate sort of manual patching, deployment, backup, high availability, disaster recovery, and then how do you, react to customer needs around DevOps practices, practice of CI/CD pipelines, and try not to make that too consuming for you as partners who are maybe managing and providing those services. So it's all about simplification, I guess, in a word. And one area they haven't really touched on at all is around this whole management, security, and governance of the estate, and how making that simpler and easier to evolve to. So this is a slide that primarily talks about our product Arc, which I'll get into in a second. But I like to use this as a positioning statement in terms of how we're thinking about Azure, as I mentioned before. So The concept is what is the right cloud option for the organizations that you're dealing with, whether they're customers or maybe you as partners for yourselves. Because the reality is that customers have got edge devices, they're running IoT, they're running different data center infrastructure, they might be running some of the Stack solutions that we've got running, and then you've got different public cloud options through AWS, Google, and of course then you've got VMware, IBM, Red Hat, multiple instances of different vendors and organizations. So how do we provide this umbrella view to okay, public cloud where you can go as an organization, but then, okay, how do we help you with your other areas of your estate to simplify and help you modernize and leverage public cloud capabilities, but bringing it to you in those other estates that you're managing. And that's the context that we're trying to set here. Is it's not just one option. That's probably one thing I sometimes hear people say. The answer is Azure. What is the question? And so it certainly moved away from that from the old days. And so what I'm talking to you about is Azure Arc. You've probably heard about this, and really for us, this is a fantastic way to provide a single control plane for your customers that maybe you're managing, or for your customers who are managing their own environments. Because what you can use is Azure Arc. I want you to think about it as a window for you to be able to manage, govern, and secure, first and foremost, that entire estate, whether it's, I said, on-premises, edge devices, public cloud, and any public cloud. So it becomes holistic and agnostic in terms of how we apply it. And then enabling the next stage is to then, how could you bring public cloud capability to the edge, to on-premise infrastructure, and if you wanted to bring Azure services to AWS and Google. So it's very, very much an agnostic view. So think of it as this, I like to sort of think about it as bringing public cloud down to where you need it and where you can, to be able to maximize the innovative services. So we'll talk about that. So at the moment, you'll see out of market, these are the sort of three areas that we've talked to at various events. I think we've got Build coming up, and then we'll have Ready from a partner perspective, and you'll see constant evolution of Arc in terms of where it's going on a roadmap. But at the moment, it's the core value proposition for you as partners to organizations is the simplification of management and government and security consistency across that entire estate, regardless of what it is. And then in public preview now is bringing Azure Data Services and Azure SQL down onto on-premise infrastructure, what I'll talk to you about in a second, because not downplaying your technical knowledge or abilities, but most people I talk to about it, sometimes it takes them 2 or 3 times to kind of compute what I'm trying to say. And then what's available now is be able to help organizations build cloud native apps anywhere at scale using GitOps and Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes services. So basically meaning you can use DevOps techniques to deploy and manage Kubernetes apps at scale, and you can have a choice of your Kubernetes distribution. As I say, it's not just all about AKS, it could be OpenShift or just Kubernetes clusters, and then using Arc to centrally manage and delegate access for DevOps roles and responsibilities, again, keeping your consistency in that configuration, your policy settings, who's allowed to do what, and of course your security. So the one I'm going to talk to you about as a sort of a next stage, this is in public preview at the moment, so it's still technically free. We haven't got finalized pricing yet, but what you will see is this will go GA very shortly. So our first value prop I mentioned, management, governance, and security. That's a great value proposition for customers running multiple infrastructure estates. But for me, this one is pretty exciting. And when you look at the slides, you go, oh yeah, okay. So what does enabling data services mean, and bringing Azure SQL managed instance and Postgres to any hardware and any Kubernetes cluster? I'll probably give you more of a scenario and using this slide as a context. So think from the bottom up. You've got a customer who's running SQL 08 on Lenovo's hardware, as an example today, or maybe it's going to be VMware, and they're not modernized, they're still paying for extended security, or perhaps they're not, and they're worried about security risk. And they want to modernize, but they can't get that workload to public cloud. So what if we could bring SQL managed instance to that on-premises infrastructure using a Kubernetes cluster, which means you're modernizing the SQL estate, you're keeping the data where it is, and therefore the apps connected to it where it is, running on that hardware, but you're bringing SQL managed instance to that hardware, running on Kubernetes clusters, and therefore when you're running SQL MI or SQL managed instance, then you're getting those ongoing security patches and updates that you no longer have to worry about. So you're completely modernizing the database and therefore potentially the application because of what you're able to do with the PaaS services you're bringing down to any infrastructure. So as you can see here, you've got your hardware at the bottom. It doesn't have to be on-premises hardware. It can be Stack HCI or Cloud, Google Cloud or Amazon on the EC2 SKU. And then you run the Kubernetes cluster on top of the hardware. You run the data. You make sure you've got Azure Arc enabled across that hardware. So you turn on security settings, Azure Monitor, backup, HADR, etc. And then you bring your data services through SQL MI or Postgres down onto that cluster of Kubernetes, and then you can run your applications, etc., and get those data insights for your customers. So I hope that kind of makes sense, but ultimately it's thinking about bringing SQL PaaS down onto on-premises is probably the first thing, which is a great way for customers to modernize, get the ongoing security and patches updates. If they've got software assurance, they could therefore use Azure Hybrid Benefit to migrate that to SQL MI and no longer pay for the licensing, which reduces the cost even more. So there's lots and lots of benefits for a customer to be compelled to go down this track. So that's going GA pretty soon, but you can fool around with it now. There's no pricing out yet, but it's not quite. So when we're thinking about Arc and the pricing model, that's always the one that is a bit of a question I get is, think about customers, servers, and environments at the bottom. You run Azure Arc as a solution for the customer's environment, which is free. Set up your customer's control plane. You're tagging your resource, your role-based access controls and activity logs. That's all free to use Arc. So think of Arc as the enabler. And then I would probably go to the top first rather than this enabled services where you can turn on Azure Policy, Monitor, Azure Defender, Security Center, Sentinel, backup, etc., and start to provide insights to your customer for their environment on performance, security settings, have that consistency of that governance, that management and security ongoing. And then, as I said, from there you could start bringing on some other capabilities with SQL managed instance and Postgres. So this model here is sort of like a Contoso managed service provider concept, pretty much the same thing as I've described. You use Arc to set up your Azure policy, your customers' Azure policy and update management, particularly if they're already on Azure. That means you can start applying that across the org, but it's not much to get that set up. Use that best practice that we advise to get customers set up with Azure Policy and Azure Monitor, and then slowly move them into, or as soon as you feel comfortable and the customer's comfortable, to the other capabilities around security and Azure Policy settings and update management, and then start to provide those modernized and innovative solutions that I've talked about. One thing you might have heard about is Azure Lighthouse, or you may or may not. A lot of people haven't. This is basically aimed at service providers who are managing multiple customer tenants and subscriptions and trying to simplify the way that's done. Think of this as Azure Arc steroids, because you can basically use Lighthouse as a means to manage multiple environments under that and simplify your operations, potentially reduce your OPEX. We've got research from Forrester which has come out and suggesting that those partners that have used Lighthouse already, which partners like Datacom have already set up a solution called Beacon, that they can potentially save $2 to $3 million a year in OPEX just through simplification and ease of management, but also drive net new revenue for them as well because of the services you're able to apply to those environments. So the concept being, you've got Lighthouse as the portal to therefore manage multiple customers. How does that work with Azure Arc? Well, pretty simple. It just applies to the customer's tenant and their subscription. So it just falls under that. And what you'll see with everything that we land going forward, it's all ARM template based, which means it'll be cloud native, the kind of solutions we run, and they'll be able to fit and be deployable through the Azure portal and therefore through the customer's subscriptions and tenants. a couple of partners have sort of come out with some great quotes, none of which are in the ANZ or APAC region that I'm aware of, but I mean, Avanade obviously are, but they're global. But certainly when you pair Lighthouse with Arc together, then it's all about expanding revenue opportunities, improving efficiencies, and really overcoming customer objections because of the proximity and flexibility with their workloads and helping them set them right and ready for modernisation. These are some of the partners that I'm aware of. I've put some of the ones from an ANZ perspective. I'll chuck those in there. This was a corp slide and added in a few local ones. But these are some of the ones globally. If you wanted to talk to them, I'm sure they can give you some insight as well. So just to reiterate, the point here is what we're sort of suggesting is migrate what you can for your customers to Azure where possible. Help get them set up with your role-based access controls policy, move what workloads you can. If you can't move other workloads for various reasons, and you want to simplify the customer's environment to provide consistency in management and security, then deploy Azure Arc to unify those operations, and then modernize through bringing on Azure services to any infrastructure, like I mentioned, with building cloud native apps and the SQL data MI, or Postgres on-prem. And then the next part is to think about modernizing the infrastructure with our Azure Stack portfolio, which is a good segue to the next part of my chat. So you've probably heard about our Azure Stack portfolio from a Stack Edge and Stack Hub perspective. Stack Hub has been around for about 4 years. It's primarily aimed at disconnected options for organizations that can't be connected all the time or don't necessarily want to be. It's great if you want to build cloud native solutions with DevOps onto that estate. It starts at a 16 node piece of infrastructure and obviously can scale and connect from there. And then we've got Azure Stack Edge, which is all about which you can order through the portal, and you can bring AI capabilities to the edge and IoT devices. A great example of that is with organizations that are using cameras, security cameras, surveillance, etc., across like an airport, for example, and they want to bring AI technologies and data insights using the cameras, and by connecting this device to those through the IoT devices and using IoT Hub and a bunch of other solutions, they can get greater data insights around maybe where their traffic goes, what shops they're going to, change the way that they set up their airport in terms of maximizing revenues for the retailers and therefore maximizing revenue for the airport because they clip the ticket. So that's all those kind of things in terms of, as an example, as an or machine learning, AI capabilities. One you may not have heard of, which went GA in December, was Azure Stack HCI. And this is our hero offering now in our hardware play. It starts as a 2-node, 8-core piece of infrastructure. It's available through most of the OEMs that you know of today. And the great thing is it starts small but can scale big. It comes in various options. It has therefore also is great for stretch clustering across multiple sites. And we'll actually deploy, this is the real benefit is you'll be able to deploy Azure services onto this piece of infrastructure with Azure Kubernetes service, which also means that this is a Azure native solution. It's not, the difference between Stack Hub and Stack HCI is Stack Hub is cloud native, but it's not Azure native. So it means if you ever want to migrate customers off it to public cloud, it's a full migration. But if you move a customer onto Stack HCI, it's Azure native, meaning it's in any stage as a stepping stone, they might use it to then go to public cloud, then they can migrate off that a lot easier because it's based on ARM templates and the Azure portal. And so what this is Azure Stack HCI is an operating system that sits on top of the hardware. You activate it through the Azure portal. It starts at $10 per core per month. And obviously it's an OpEx-based model. Some of the OEMs have got an OpEx-based offering in market today as well. So you can buy them on OpEx or CapEx-based in terms of then building that into your managed service offering. And because it's so small in terms of that 2-node, 8-core starting point, it doesn't need to be multi-tenant because it will sit under the customer's subscription. And you'll be able to manage that through the Azure portal with Azure Arc. So these are kind of some of the scenarios where we're suggesting to organizations to use it for. If you're familiar with hyperconverged infrastructure, it's pretty big on, I guess, downscaling the amount of infrastructure you need, because you're using software-defined networking and software-defined storage, reducing the amount of infrastructure you need in your environment if you're a hoster or a customer with your own environment. It's great for modernizing branch offices and I guess multiple office sites and providing stretched clustering. And therefore you can bring a lot of these VDI capabilities with Citrix on it. So basically anything that runs on a VM, Windows or Linux, or can go into a Kubernetes cluster, will run on the solution, and then you can bring modernized solutions to this environment. Some questions we get around comparing to Windows Server. So this is, I guess you could say, Stack HCI is our new modernized operating system. Windows Server 2019 came out with a form of listening noise. But one of the real value propositions from moving from on-premises to modernized infrastructure with Stack HCI, as you can see down the bottom, is if you've got a customer running 08 or R2 Windows, you can move that to Stack HCI and get the ongoing extended security updates that you may not be paying for. So it's a pretty good offering to help customers modernize.
Excuse me, did you say that you're getting updates that you're not paying for?
So if you mean in terms of ESU, sorry? This extended security one?
Yeah, I may have misheard you, but I thought
yes.
You just said you could get security updates that you're not paying for.
Yeah, so today, if you, as an example, if you moved from on-premises to public Azure and you use Azure Hybrid Benefit to public Azure and you migrate those workloads, then you'll get ongoing security updates until that license is due for renewal. So at the moment, you'll know that Windows 08 is end of support and therefore no longer getting security updates. So you either pay for your extended security updates today, or the offering, which has been for about 2 years, is you could migrate that to Azure and get the ongoing security updates without having to pay for that because you've modernized and gone to public cloud. What we're saying is exactly the same scenario by moving to Stack HCI.
Thank you for the clarification. Thanks.
No problem.
Patrick, we had another question too in the chat. Will there be a difference on how this is consumed or licensed?
The Stack HCI? Was that what that was?
Going back to Arc, I think was the question, Paddy. There was a slide on that, sorry, Kat, where there's layers to that.
Yeah, so it's all deployed via the portal. So it's not a license as such. It's just, I think you were meeting the slide.
Yeah, you did have a slide that summarised the pricing. So Sarika, the Arc control, or management control plane, no cost. But then if there's certain services like pushing SQL down to your equipment as a managed instance, then there can be add-on costs.
Yes, and those, I think the question is that these are all just standard Azure billing prices. All right, so there'll be standard Azure prices. There will be differences though for, say, SQL MI, because you're using the customer's infrastructure. Therefore, you won't be paying for infrastructure and compute costs. So that's why the pricing hasn't come out yet, because we're not GA. But basically, your customer has their own infrastructure. So all Azure and Arc are supplying is the SQL managed instance capability, so the PaaS offerings and the ongoing updates and patches. But all the pricing for policy, monitor, defender, Sentinel, log analytics, that's all standard Azure billing pricing.
Okay, so thanks, Patrick. What I'm hearing is that compared to how what we pay for the current, say SQL Pass, let me take an example specifically of SQL Pass, that what we currently pay for that, there's going to be a little management fee on top. Is that right?
No, not really. So I think the Arc piece is free, all right? What you're using Arc to do is bring the simplification and reduce risk of security and cyber threats through having consistent offerings across or multiple infrastructures, so you're simplifying that need. So I guess there's an additional cost for that, but there's huge return on investment and value proposition for a customer to do that.
Right.
And with the SQL piece, it's all about modernization, and again, and then reducing security and cyber threats, because you're modernizing from SQL on-prem. You're not paying for extended security, or maybe you are, but it's costing you a lot. So there's a piece there. You move to SQL MI on Kubernetes through Azure Arc onto the customer's infrastructure. Yes, there's a cost, but you're modernizing the environment, and you no longer have to worry about security updates.
Okay.
Thanks, Paddy.
Thank you. Got that.
Thomas, I think you got another one.
Yeah, I do. Thank you very much for that. I'll lower my hand here. So I have to admit, a lot of this makes me dizzy when I think about Azure licensing and who's paying for what. But just like Sarika, I have a similar question of, it sounds like we're making an adjustment from 2 years ago, where we said, all right, everybody, you can have your clients in your own tenant space. What I hear you saying tonight is, hey, we can take that off your hands and bring it inside their client's subscription, and you'll just manage it from the console, but you won't have the responsibility for collecting fees, and you won't have the security responsibility anymore. We'll take that on.
No, that's definitely incorrect. The idea behind this
Good.
offering is for you to build your managed services around that and encompass it within it, and that's what Datacom's doing with Lighthouse.
So where is it housed? Where is the housing around this? So like, if it's not in our tenant space, if it's in Microsoft's tenant space, and we're letting
no, it's not in Microsoft's tenant space. It's in yours. Yeah. So you're talking about Lighthouse, Thomas?
So
I'm not really sure. I'm
Paddy,
trying to keep up with what I heard.
Paddy, if I just interject for a moment, you only had a couple of slides to go. Let's get your present. If you don't mind, we'll just get Paddy's presentation finished, and then we'll continue a little bit of Q&A. Because we're running for 2 hours, the plan is just have a bit of an informal chat in between, allow people to take a quick break and take a stretch. My smartwatch was just telling me I should do that. But then we will do a more detailed Q&A, and I think we can talk a bit more about the difference between Arc and Stack Hub and HCI at the end, if people are interested in that Q&A, if you don't mind.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks so
that'd
much.
be fine.
Cool. So look, this as a summary in terms of that Stack HCI, we sort of moved on from, bring your minds back to that from a Stack HCI perspective. This is kind of my favorite slide, because it sort of summarizes everything in one go from a modernizing infrastructure perspective. So you've got your various hardware ecosystem. There's over 200 solutions. There's an HCI's catalog, which you can look that up if you want. You've got the software layer that sits on top of that, which is Stack HCI. Incidentally, you could download that onto any infrastructure that is software-defined storage and networking capable. You activate Stack HCI via the Azure portal, and then you can manage, or then you can bring any VMs, Windows or Linux on top of that, and then run various other solutions that run in a Azure Kubernetes cluster. So SQL MI through data services, bringing AI and machine learning to the edge, or other containerized apps on top of that. And you manage that all with Azure Arc, have that consistency of that governance and security on the top of it. And if you're not using Arc, then you can use on the left here, Windows Admin Center, and bring in the other Azure services for that hardware with Security Center, Monitor, and Backup and Site Recovery. Hope that makes sense. So really, just to summarize, I've got 3 slides to go, which I'll move on quickly. Is, like I mentioned, look to migrate your customers to Azure where you can. Hopefully you're already doing that, but maybe you can't move everything. Simplify the management and unified operations with Azure Arc for your customer, and activate your Azure policy and role-based access controls. Then start enabling and modernizing their environments across on-prem and various other providers with cloud-native apps, Azure SQL MI, and then look to modernize infrastructure with hyper-converged technology. That doesn't necessarily have to be in that order, but I would certainly think 0 and 1 would be the first two. From a resource perspective, if you'd like to learn more, go to that link, aka.ms/Azure-hybrid-resources. I didn't make the link up, it's too long if you ask me. You can learn a lot more. You can download various offerings and learn about Azure Arc Jumpstart. This is an open community that's available. You can learn a whole lot of things around deploying Azure Arc. You can chat and talk about various other things, including your questions around Lighthouse.
Thank you, Paddy.
Thanks.
So, as I said, today's really just a bit of a run through of a few areas. And Paddy, look, we would love to have a follow-up session where we perhaps go into further detail around Arc and those other traditional stack components and the new HCI platform. Everyone, if you want to take a quick break, please do so. I'm just going to have a brief informal chat here with Paddy, and in 5 minutes we're going to seek to kick off with the next session, which is going to be Robert Crane talking about Office 365 and Azure security. So, Paddy, I think what you went through there is very exciting stuff. I've been recently having the conversation that the internet is finally becoming what I envisaged it might be 25 years ago, where it's really now starting to be at the reach of commerce broadly. It used to be really only within the reach of major enterprise. And I love seeing what Arc represents, where, 3-4 years ago, yes, you could do an Azure Stack if you're an enterprise and you could deploy it on your own kit as a standalone. Really what this is now doing is bringing a seamless control plane, whether it's to, Azure AWS, Azure Google Cloud, Azure, legacy on-prem Hyper-V or VMware systems. That's really it in a nutshell, is that Microsoft's seeking to help bring that control plane together, isn't it?
Take myself off mute. Yeah, that's exactly right. You've got it nailed in one, and then I think it's just, how do we help bring, like Satch's view is make Azure the world's computer, like Bill Gates' PC on every desk on steroids again, kind of.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that, right?
Larry, more than a decade from Oracle, Larry Ellison said there's only room for 7 computers in the world. And look, there's obviously some big public clouds coming out, but there's going to be a need for edge computing. There's some, interesting Australian organisations coming out, like leading edge data centres, no relationship to leading edge computers, and where organisations are going to be able to have this equipment sitting closer to them for those real-time apps, for the IoT, the cameras, like you said. I was pleased that you said Kubernetes about 1 million times in that presentation, because I always look at the word and I wonder how to say it. It's like canal. I was, is that right? Is it canal?
Yeah, that's the right pronunciation, yeah.
I was talking to Shiva yesterday, and Shiva said your name went off good. That saves me the incorrect pronunciation.
My name at school was Far. You put the two together, you'll work out why.
So, Paddy, Kubernetes, I think that's probably an area that the industry needs to get its head around too, this container concept.
Yeah.
You're new to the role, but that'd be great also, I think, to come back and have a session at some stage with the right person explaining where that fits into the roadmap.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got, I don't know if you've heard of Brendan Burns, but he was one of the founders of Kubernetes as a concept. And he worked for Microsoft. So he helped us to build and deploy Azure Kubernetes.
Yes.
And made that a lot simpler in terms of its concept and how to deploy it and use it. So that's why we'll push AKS where we can. But as I said, you can use these solutions today on various Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, and I mean, I think so. We, in what I do in our business, help businesses to Azure, and it was one thing a few years ago as to how do you move the workloads there, doing it in the same way, running the same operating systems. It's now the transition to the modern app and things that can't move and can move. And so really enjoyed having you on with us, Paddy. Hopefully you can stick around. As I said, everyone, the aim is to have a Q&A at the end. But I think really there's probably the scope for a deeper session on the Azure Arc. And you did touch on Lighthouse, multi-customer management, again, totally separate potential topic. So thanks
Yeah,
again. We're going to move on now to our next presentation, and that is from Robert Crane. Robert Crane has many years in the, he's just grabbed the screen, but he's had many years in the Microsoft ecosystem, expert in things like SharePoint many years past, but right now, Robert's an MVP inside the Azure 365 space. Welcome, Robert, and take it away.
Thanks, guys. So it's important to remember that in just the last week, the US president has signed an executive order mandating that cybersecurity become a priority for all elements within the US government. This has set a timeline, this has set a number of requirements for the US government to get up to speed and get up to a suitable level when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, I took a look at today's paper, Sydney Morning Herald for me, and again, I'll read you a line from the front page. Real estate listings portal Domain is warning users to be careful when trying to secure rental properties on its website after a cyber attack allowed an unauthorized third party to access personal information and demand deposits. So the idea here is that every single day, cybersecurity is becoming a more and more important part of every single business, whether they're technology or not. Now, the challenge with security is going to be that it's not only a technical requirement, it is also a people challenge. Now, when you boil it down to its simplest terms, it comes down to a diagram like this I found that you can take to anybody to help them to understand what security is all about. So we have a triangle here, and the reality is you can choose any two sides, but you can't choose all three. So you can choose to be secure and cheap, it's not going to be usable. If you want usable and cheap, well, then it's surely not going to be secure. So let's look at multi-factor authentication. That is very secure, and again, it is very cheap because it's included in every single Office 365, Microsoft 365 plan. But implementing MFA does make things slightly less usable because we have to go through this additional challenge to get access to our data. So the first lesson here is that security is always a trade-off. You need to make, or the customer needs to make the decision about where that trade-off is going to occur. Now, what we're finding is we want to generally err in the direction of more rather than less security. Now, in today's cloud environment, many things are different from what they were back when there was a large focus on-prem. What that means is the concept is that the cloud is now far more secure than on-prem. That is because of a shared responsibility model where Microsoft is doing a lot of the heavy lifting down at the infrastructure level. That doesn't preclude additional steps being taken, but things like the cloud allow the aggregation of millions and trillions of signals that can be run through machine learning, artificial intelligence across many environments and then synthesized and provided back to us. So again, the world is different. But with that said, there are some basic tenets around security that will always be the same. The most common one that people hopefully are familiar with is defense in depth. So if we think back to when we had castles and forts, they were protected by moats and drawbridges and tall walls, and that worked very well. They're not, again, an absolute, but the idea was to make it difficult for an attacker to get to the valuables that are in the center of our defense in depth strategy. Now, I think everybody's probably familiar with all the stats you see about breaches and ransomware attacks and so on. But what I thought I'd do is just focus on some numbers from Microsoft around the challenges for people implementing security. So what we see is that security has a cost. There's no doubt that there is a cost to implement, manage, maintain, and find that needle in the haystack. Okay, 80% of our breaches out there are taken from incidents where passwords are captured from other third parties and users have typically reused them, or they're using bad passwords. Automation is a fantastic part of today's technology, but it can also be used for nefarious purposes. It can be set up to do brute force attacks, random password attempts. Now, if you don't believe me, go and have a look at Wikipedia, do a search for the 10,000 most common passwords, and you'll find a complete updated Wikipedia article on the 10,000 most common passwords, which again, anybody can take and reuse in an attempt to get into systems. One of the other interesting points is simply the number of products many suppliers are using. So think about how many security products you may be using. Each of those creates their own unique vulnerabilities in the fact of where's the information going, who's monitoring it, how's it being implemented, is it being fully implemented, patched, and updated. And I think the big takeaway here is to be asking yourself is, well, how serious are we about security? Everybody says they're serious about security. There's lots and lots of websites and lots of social media about it, but where is the reality here? So the idea here from a partner's point of view is to say this is a growing area and it will continue to grow, and SMBs are beginning to realize that this is a priority for their business, because typically a cyber intrusion or attack on their organization has a very high chance of putting them out of business. That's an extinction event. Okay, so we need to protect these organizations to make sure that they can continue on. One of the interesting trends now is that many SMBs are beginning to see the importance of security and beginning to question the providers of security services. They're going back to those people who have contractual arrangements or are indicating they are doing security for that organization and basically asking questions, verifying it, getting third party, getting auditors to come in and verify that settings are at a level they should be. And the reality is that SMBs simply don't have the skill set. There is so much to be across the environment and what's happening happening out there each and every day that requires a specialist, a trusted advisor to do that. So the idea here is you're looking at a growing market, a growing need, as well as a situation where the end user, the customer, the consumer, basically doesn't have the expertise, they don't have enough time or resources, they are not familiar with some of these environments, and in summary, they're basically overwhelmed by what needs to be done. Because as we know in security, it only takes one vulnerability, one option to get through and potentially exploit the environment. Now, as I mentioned, one of the big changes in today's world is simply the fact that the device is the firewall. The device is the endpoint, which means that we have devices that people use every day. We have devices that users are using across multiple operating systems, no longer just Microsoft. So we've got iOS, we've got Android, we've got Linux out there. We need to protect these wherever they are. Now, in a world where people have gone and work remotely, we've also got the situation where these devices could be in many, many different locations on good and poor quality internets. We could have people using machines that their kids use at the same time to play games on and so on. So this is one of the biggest challenges. How do we manage, maintain, and secure all of these remote devices, which are only going to grow? Now, the good news from the Microsoft perspective is that many people don't appreciate that Microsoft is an enormous security business. At this stage, they reported over $10 billion in the last year, and that is a 40% year-on-year growth. So many people mistake the fact that Microsoft is purely about emails, purely about productivity, purely about Office desktop software or operating systems. The reality is it's fast becoming probably the biggest security company on the planet, because it has a range of solutions that can protect a variety of environments, because it has a variety of customers. Now, when you look at that range, you see that Microsoft is probably the only company that can provide protection from a desktop, from an endpoint, all the way through to a cloud service. So some of the examples here are things like BitLocker, mobile device management, we have data loss prevention, we have cloud app security, we have all of these options that are available that can be configuring and need to be configured appropriately to provide the full range of protection. Now, one of the oversights I see a lot of people make is the fact that they don't enable many of the out-of-the-box or the provided security features with the products they've purchased. So people that are running Windows 10 have a vast array of security options available to them, even in a standalone mode. Office 365, Microsoft 365, again, is a huge example of many, many options that can be and should be enabled. Now, if you look across the attack chain here, you'll see that a number of Microsoft information or Microsoft products and services are going to give you the coverage, right? And this is not all encompassing. There is just so many products, but I think these are the main ones that I'd be calling out. So we start with Defender for Office 365. This is an additional mail hygiene scanning capability to protect against attachments and malicious links. We've then got Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. So this is the agent that will provide traditional AV, will provide endpoint protection, but also link to a cloud service to allow reporting, management, EDR, and all of that. We've got identity protection to look at the sequences and the intelligence around when users log in. Are they logging in from the same IP address? Is it an IP associated with the dark web? How many times are they doing this a day, across which devices, and report that back. We've also got something called Azure Sentinel. So an important thing here to remember is that we're talking about security in the Microsoft cloud. This is not just a Windows 10 idea. This is basically a combination, an integration of the Microsoft stack, Windows 10, Microsoft 365, Azure. All of these provide capabilities to assist in this defense in depth approach to security. All of these require configuration, setup, management, and control by a skilled party. Now, not only do we have Sentinel, we have Cloud App Security, and we also have Microsoft Defender for Identity for people that still have an on-prem environment. Now, the big benefit Microsoft provides where few others can compete is simply the amount of signals that it's receiving from these environments that it can then take into what's known as the security graph. It can then apply machine learning and artificial intelligence and look at those and provide signals and data back to people. So you can know about breaches that have occurred elsewhere before they happen or before you may see them in your environment, thanks to this concept of signals intelligence. Now, the idea is this signals intelligence comes from things like Teams meetings that we're on, from your identifying yourself when you logged into your environment. And at the end of the day, there's so much data. We're seeing here billions and potentially trillions of signals, events, information that is occurring that is virtually impossible for small organizations to take advantage of or to leverage. However, the advantage with partnering with Microsoft is going to be you're going to get access to these enterprise-grade tools with these billions and billions of signals that you can then apply to an environment of any size. This is the huge advantage that Microsoft will provide anybody who is utilizing their environments. Now, we've talked about some generalities here, so let's get into some specifics, hopefully give you some takeaways that you can use to apply to your environments today. The thing you need to think about primarily is identity is the most important thing. The way the user logs in, they log into their phone with an identity. They log into their desktop with an identity. They log into their Outlook web access with an identity. It's all about identity. It's not about firewalls. It's not about domain controllers. It's all about securing the identity first and foremost. And the good thing about this is we have tools like Azure AD and some of the additional add-ons that we get with Azure AD P1 to provide and integrate with this. Now, the other thing that Microsoft is moving towards and encouraging everybody to move towards is zero trust architecture. That means you can't make an assumption that because something is behind a firewall or because user X logs on that it is secure. You have to assume that every single device needs to secure any communications it has with any other device at every single stage. So you need to be thinking about how do we constantly make sure that every piece of our architecture and environment is secure and reduces the environment for attackers to get in. So zero trust is one of the major aims that we need to get to. And this, interestingly, was something that was called out in that executive order written by the President of the US in the last week. He's called out the fact that they need to move to a zero trust architecture. Now, if you stop and think about it, if it's being mandated at a government level, eventually it's going to probably become mandatory down at the commercial level as well. So being on the front foot, getting started early with this sort of mentality and approach is going to save you time in the long run. Now, the three simple options I suggest that you consider when you're starting any security is going to be using Secure Score, using multi-factor, and also setting up conditional access policies. So let's drill into those quickly. So if you want to have a look at the Secure Score of any single tenant in Microsoft, you go to securescore.office.com. You'll need to log in as a global administrator. To do that, it will give your tenant and all the security in your environment from the Microsoft aspect a rating out of 100. So you can see that this tenant, demo tenant, is only rated at 13 or 14%, right? That's very, very poor. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that I would suggest to you that anything below a rating of 30 is you are vulnerable. You need to really step up your game and get that to a much higher level. Anything below 50, it's a little bit better, but not much. I think really the baseline you should be aiming at as a minimum is 65. So every partner, I believe, should be aiming at a minimum score for themselves and their customers of at least 65. However, that's not really good enough. I would suggest good partners are moving their secure score further north and getting towards or above that 80% mark. So if you want, number one takeaway is go back, have a look at your own secure score in your own environment, and if it's not at 80%, then start working to get it to 80%. Now, the other thing that you can do in Secure Score, if you go up to the include option in the top right, you can pull down a menu and you'll see that you have an option called Achievable Score. This will give you an idea of basically the capabilities, the licensing that you are paying for already that you haven't implemented fully. So it's an indication of where you should be based on the licenses that you have. This is a really, really good discussion to go and have with customers. You can look at their secure score or prospects. You can go to their secure score, pull this down and say, look, you are paying for these licenses and you aren't using all these capabilities. Let us show you how to get full usage of all the licensing that you are paying for. Now, if we have a look back to the RSA conference where we've got some stats from Microsoft, 1.2 million compromised accounts occurred in January 2020. But if we analyze that, what you find is 99.9% of those compromised accounts did not have MFA. So let that sink in. MFA is the number one way that you can almost eliminate the chance of compromise. Now, you might say, yes, that's great. That seems obvious to me, but let's have a look at some more statistics. So according to CoreView, the majority of admins of accounts have not enabled multi-factor on their own admin accounts. And here's the really scary stat. 97% of Microsoft 365 users are not using MFA. 97%. So you can look at that and you can say, you know what? I see that as an opportunity for me to make sure that I'm focused on security and go and talk to these businesses about the value of MFA. And here's my market share. My opportunity share in the market is 97% of people have the capability to enable MFA, and there is no cost to do that. Why have they not done that? And the other one we see is that in organizations with techs, they are providing too many controls, too much ability to do that. How can you get access to the right information? Because if you have an insider threat or a rogue employee, how can we make sure they don't damage the organization? Now, quickly on MFA, yes, MFA, most people implement IC as a rolling set of numbers we're all familiar with. But again, Microsoft provides the capability to use Windows Hello for Business. So all I have to do for me in the morning is sit down in front of my Surface machine, it recognizes me, logs me in, that's the first factor. Then the machine has a second factor with TPM and talks to Azure AD, and I'm logged in securely without even having to know a password or put in a PIN. How convenient for that is a customer? I would suggest that's even more convenient for them than probably the way they're logging in today. Now, we've also got a multi-factor app, and that app can be used for the rolling numbers as we traditionally do. But remember that we've also got the ability to push the notifications that we can choose a number that matches the number on the screen to be logged in. So again, we don't need the password. We can use an authentication method on our devices to verify that in a secure manner. Now, again, in environments where the Authenticator app isn't used or permitted or not preferred, you can also use FIDO2 keys. So these are things like YubiKeys that can be used as your second factor. Microsoft supports all of these, and this is, I think, one of the differentiation points that you see between partners who are progressive. They are the ones implementing passwordless login versus the traditional methods. Now, as mentioned, apart from MFA, the other thing that I would call out is Azure AD conditional access. So conditional access basically looks at a successful login. So once the users put their details in, their login is evaluated against a number of policies. You know, which device are they logging in, which location are they from, which apps do they want to log in, and this is all policy controlled. And then it makes decisions. Will it allow the user to access? Will it limit their access? Will it require them to do MFA and so on? Now, the good news here is that conditional access is going to require policy. Policy is going to be something that a skilled technician needs to enable and needs to set up. Now, again, one of the big benefits of the Microsoft environment is going to be, this is going to be a consistent interface environment every single time for every single customer who has implemented conditional access. Now, even better than that, you can implement this with automation using things like PowerShell, because Microsoft allows that capability to quickly and easily create scripts that will take your best practices and allow you to apply it to tenant after tenant after tenant. Now, what you see is that if you try to use conditional access and you are prevented, you will see a message like this. So yes, you have put in the right credentials, but no, you can't have access. Now, what was really exciting is that Microsoft announced this today. So now conditional access can be added upon a GPS location. So not only can we restrict by IP, not only can we restrict by country, but now we can actually restrict by GPS location. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that, learn what that is, and start implementing, because that's a great way to begin to, again, lock down and control users. Now, one of the other things that I see people don't appreciating is that Microsoft is a leader in many, many security aspects on its own. So, for example, here you'll see that it is a leader in the email space. Now, the reason is that when an email comes into your Microsoft 365 environment, it's basically going through all of these layers. We've got edge protection, sender intelligence, content filtering, and we've got protection at the Office clients, in SharePoint, OneDrive. All of this is available to you. All of this you should be turning on. You should be ramping up to the max and setting to best practices. Microsoft will also give you the capability to analyze the mail flow. So here you can see of 5,000 inbound messages, the edge filtering's knocked off over 2,000 of those for me. So you can go in and drill in and see the effect of these policies and demonstrate this to a customer to show the value that these technologies correctly configured are providing. Now, if you haven't looked at the Exchange environment recently, you'll find that they also have a configuration analyzer, much like SecureScore. So now you can analyze the Exchange Online policy and filtering environment, and you'll see that Microsoft even provides you the capability to click a single button and adopt best practices if you want. So again, it's really easy to start doing this and securing your environment to best practices, and that will continue to improve. One of the other things I would encourage you to make sure of is that your audit logging is enabled. Many tenants do not have audit logging enabled, so go into the URL provided there and make sure that your audit logging is enabled so you're capturing all the events if you need to, again, go in and do that. Also, if you want to get the alerts so you know what's going on, again, have a look at that URL. You can set up custom alerts to tell you things like suspicious emails, downloaded malware, and so on. Now, Microsoft is moving a large component of its security tools into a single portal at security.microsoft.com. So if you pop in there, have a look, you'll see the aggregation of many of these tools, which again had individual portals over time. Now, one of the tools I'd like to call out quickly is Microsoft Cloud App Security. This is basically a tool that allows you to look across various areas for things like unusual downloads, suspicious IPs, impossible travel, impersonations, and so on. So if, again, you haven't looked at Cloud App Security as a logging and alerting mechanism, I think you should. And again, I will call out that once again, Gartner has called out Microsoft as a leader in the endpoint protection. So what this means is the actual agent you put on your endpoint, the power of that. Most people typically deride Windows Defender, but it is proven to be one of the best endpoint protections provided. Now, when you couple that with the protections the cloud provides, again, it's pretty much bulletproof. So if you haven't looked again at the Defender for endpoint, I again encourage you to do that. Have a look at the capabilities. The other one, the final one I'd like to call out here is Azure Sentinel. Azure Sentinel, again, is an Azure service, and what it does is allows you to aggregate your logs from many, many sources, from Exchange, from SharePoint, pull that into a single portal that you can view any incidents, act on them, and take actions and report. And the great thing is when you combine Sentinel with Azure Lighthouse, you can get multi-tenant capabilities in a single pane of glass with basically virtually no cost to do that. Now, we've only got a short amount of time. I am winding up, but I haven't even had time to talk about things like device guard, exploit guard, application guard, credential guard, and so on. There are just so many options here that Microsoft make available, typically for free or included in the license, that I don't see people turning on and enabling. So don't look at buying third-party products from other vendors. Look at, have I utilized everything Microsoft's already providing me as part of my license, all for free? So in summary, the takeaways I have for you are that Microsoft is a leader. There's no question in security. It's a $10 billion a year business growing 40% year on year on, and that's only going to continue. Okay, and remember that you need to implement what Microsoft's providing inside 365 and inside Windows. Look at your secure score. So there's an identity score, there's secure score, there's the Exchange scoring as well. Look at all those places as a great place to kick things off. Don't just think of Microsoft 365, as I mentioned. Think about Azure. What else can Azure do to help you with security? Integration is the key here. Microsoft's going to win on its integration. All of these things natively integrate to make your life easier, and also that means automation. And I cannot stress enough, if you do anything after today's session, please go and turn on MFA absolutely everywhere for every single customer. And don't be afraid to use machine intelligence and AI to make your life easier and leverage the power that Microsoft provides across its total environment down to even a single user. So I've provided some resources there for you. I'm sure we'll make sure the slides get out to each and every one of you after the fact, so take advantage of those. I will put my details up there. Please feel free to contact me on the emails if you have any questions or clarifications. My Twitter is also there. And I think with that, Guy, it's probably time to hand back to you. I think, Guy, you need to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Robert. I switched cameras. I now need to mute over here. Give me 1 second.
May I ask that he go back to the slide with the shortcuts so we could just take a quick snapshot?
Okay. So now that I've muted myself there, Robert, as you were saying, we do have a very limited amount of time today, and it's a quagmire of a topic, because, you know, I guess every nook and cranny is an opportunity for someone to compromise an environment. And similar to your triangle around security, I think there's a continuum, and that is between access and convenience. Where you have access, there's risk. Where you have convenience, you're running a risk. Now, everyone, we're running this through as 2 hours. If you want to take a break, we are going to do a Q&A at the end. I'll take 5 minutes now. Philip at Myers on, and so Philip, thanks for joining us. Philip's, I guess, a steward of Microsoft in Australia, 30 years plus with Microsoft. And he asked one question, Robert, of you, and that was, how does Microsoft educate its partners that it really is a security company? What do you think is the steps for us as a community to discover and learn about the security potential or opportunity that's there?
I think the biggest challenge is that Microsoft offers a lot of entry vectors into its security environment. So you can learn, you know, you'll see posts out there of how to become a Defender for 365 Ninja, how to become a Sentinel Ninja. They've got all these siloed, to an extent, capabilities. My advice is exactly what I said in that. Start with Secure Score. Secure Score will tell you what your rating is, as well as a list of improvements and suggestions and step-by-step for you to get your Secure Score up. Start with what it's telling you you need to do, follow through the links, improve that knowledge, and grow it out from there. Yes, there's lots of bright, shiny objects and security out there, but good security starts with the basics and moves through a process, moves through a checklist, making sure that it covers all the holes and doesn't leave anything behind. So my advice, as always, is to start with Secure Score and grow from there.
And I think you make an extremely valuable point in terms of taking actions to start with MFA, then go and look at Secure Score, or vice versa. I was interested in the Windows Hello thing, because technology can be only as good as its application. And I listened to someone talk about a man that had collapsed, and a paramedic was attending to him, and they didn't know how to unlock his phone. And the guy picked the phone up and shoved it in front of the guy's face. And of course, it unlocked his phone, and they were able to contact people. So you have to think of the scenarios, particularly in commerce, as to what implication there is into your technology choices, of course. Robert, thanks very much. As you say, a lot of information in a very short period of time. We'd love to have you back at another time for a deeper dive into one or more of those key areas for security, but greatly appreciate that. There was one more question there from Nathaniel about, will Lighthouse bring in Secure Score? I saw that was answered in the question, but drop your questions in via the chat and we'll come to them at the end. What I would like to do now is move on to introduce Dr. David Soldani, Adjunct Professor of the University of New South Wales. David, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you so much for having me today.
Our absolute pleasure, David. David is, I would almost say, a master in wireless networks and communications. David has had, you know, more than 20 years split between the giants of Nokia and Huawei, as well as being an adjunct or visiting professor to a number of universities around the world. So welcome, David, and take us away for a bit of a introduction into 5G and the cloud opportunity.
So thank you so much. And what I have prepared today is to illustrate to you what Patrick and Robert presented earlier could be applied or accessible through a 5G connectivity. And the focus of my talk is on the 5G Cloud X. Specifically, I'd like to illustrate you X being augmented and a virtual reality offering. So first, I'd like to present my vision of 2025-2030. So my vision is that all intelligence will be connected with the zero trust model Robert presented through digital twinning. And that will be done using 5G and later 6G and the machine reasoning will meet the machine learning at the edge. So intelligence, I define intelligence are basically functions with the ability of representing knowledge, processing knowledge, and make a decision. So here you have an example of an intelligent platform that is a ICAB. ICAB is from the Italian Institute of Technology in Italy. And I'm using now a couple of slides taken from Roberto Cingolani and Giorgio Metta to prove that artificial intelligence today is really costly and inefficient. Let's have a look at the numbers. So here you have the son of Roberto Cingolani and the humanoid, the son of Giorgio Metta in comparison. So we have humans that are basically grown on around 6 elements, and we are about 40 watts. So that's the power our brain dissipate to perform tasks I think will never ever be performed by machines. And an evidence of that is that this humanoid here, which is one of the most advanced platforms, robotic platform in the world, would require, say here on this slide, 200 watts to perform a part of the task that this boy would basically do without thinking, without, say, any kind of policy behind, because our brain works differently. Now look at the numbers. What we have is that with a chocolate, this boy would work, perform, do anything for about a week, and an equivalent of energy, say, provided to ICAB would allow him only to work for about 2 hours. So the first, basically, conclusions is that the power cost per operations is from 1,000 to 5,000 higher in machines. So what are the consequences of this? Apart from the costs of this element, what we need to do is to reuse this intelligence, reuse this capability. So what we want to do is to move all the intelligence residing in the robotic platform to the edge of the network. So we need to have the edge and work at the edge of the infrastructure, edge meaning close to the end user, practically close to the radiating antennas in the downlinks of the base stations. And that is necessary because we also want to reduce latency. So moving out capabilities from the platform to the cloud means that if I make a decision here, an end-to-end from a decision in action has to be less than, say, 5 milliseconds. Otherwise, basically, I have a discontinuity between a decision made centrally to what the task is performed locally. So the second trend I see extremely important is, as I mentioned, in my vision, that the machine learning requires to work with the reasoning, because the machine learning as such has many limitations. So the pattern recognition fails many times, and one of the problems, for example, biases. Then what I think is that we need to play with digital twins. So we need to prepare for an infrastructure service and platform to deal with the cyber world. So we need to really copy the physical world and reproduce that in the cyber. And that this is necessary because we can no longer wait for reducing and the impact on, for example, climate change. So we need to improve our efficiency, productivity, and definitely reduce our CO2 emissions, namely greenhouse gases emissions. And finally, looking at the shift from the 5G to 6G, it's now we are having a fundamental shift in paradigm is to move from the Internet of Things to the Internet of Intelligence, supporting the zero trust model that was presented earlier, and I couldn't agree more. So where are we with the 5G? Just a couple of slides to be on the same page that what we speak is through and real. So 5G is on, and just a couple of slides to give you a a view on the global landscape taken from a GSMA report. And last year, we have that as of today, we have assigned spectrum for 5G globally over around 40 markets, and more than 128 operators already today have received spectrum, and the radiations is within the 3 bands. Relevant is the mid band, that is between 1 to 6 gigahertz. I'm thinking of the C band, where we will anchor all our radiations using the new radio. The new radio is the wireless interface of the 5G, complementing the access using the LTE or the 4G services. So live networks all over the places. Australia already, you may benefit. I was downtown, I saw on the mobile phone up to 350 megabit per second. And as of today, we have more than 110 operators that have planned or already launched this service. Looking at the terms of the connections or connectivity and the global reach and economy of scale, we see on this slide that today we are having in place already more than 234 million connections. Majority of those are in China. China will remain definitely the largest market for reaching out about 20% of the global penetration, namely 1.8 billion connections, with again China reaching out in proportion the 40% of the connectivity globally. It's of course intended that it's not just about China. Actually, if you look at the relative numbers, the major penetration by 2025 is expected in North America, followed by Europe, Asia Pacific. And all these 3 regions will basically account for 90% of the 5G mobile connection forecast globally by 2025. The devices are there, and if we take a look at the recent document published by the GSI, we have that we have more than 700 announced devices, 431 commercially available today. And here you see on the pie chart the proportion of available devices. Yeah, we have plenty of smartphones, about 50%, half the cake, but we also have a variety of fixed wireless access custom process equipment, which is nothing else than a modem as we are using today for accessing the NBN, for example, here in Australia using cables or fiber. We do also have plenty of other form factors. I'm thinking of models installed in on a variety of robotic platform, including drones, so unmanned aerial vehicles. So the frequency I've already explained. So massive communications in the C-bands. In Australia was already assigned a band back in 2018. That's where we are receiving services. But along with that, we are now aggregating the transmission using the LTE dual connectivity or carrier aggregation to lower bands, and Australia will be soon make available also spectrum in the millimeter wave and at in the sub 1 gigahertz, namely the 800 and 900 megahertz for massive large coverage, including coverage, say, in rural areas and countryside. A quick view on the roadmap. This is the 5G standard roadmap. So 5G, but also 6G. So today, as we speak, we have already completed the specification of 2 5G releases. So release 15 that you are currently enjoying in the field, massively deployed in both in its non-standalone configurations, which is just about putting a base station next to your 4G system, and in its standalone configurations or architecture, which is an end-to-end fresh new system, not only therefore using the new radio as a data stream, but also through all the signaling and with the introduction of the 5G core network. So both releases, they support an enhanced mobile broadband experience, but also ultra reliable connection, ultra reliable low latency communications. And when we combine the two features, we already today fully meet the ITU requirements. That is the vision we depicted back in 2015. Now we have further announcements, so we will integrate massive machine type of communications, that is release 17, for then start thinking of a new set of use case category and start integrating the research already massively ongoing, especially in terms of enabling technologies architecture, on study items, so technical reports, for then specifying the 6G and enjoying those services by 2030. So where are we today in terms of use cases? So we also understand how we may position the platform presented in services by the earlier speakers on our 5G communications system. So 5G, the one you're having in place, deployed today, supports three main use cases already mentioned: EMBB, MMTC, URLs. Okay, now by 2025, with the release 16 and 17, and beyond that, we will be able to exploit all spectrum and radiating across the whole frequency range up to 1 gigahertz, and the system will be complemented by artificial intelligence with introduction of a parallel plane or machine learning pipeline. So what kind of new user scenarios we are having in front of us? So first of all, we will be able to integrate services in terms of uplink-centric broadband communications. And that is about smart factoring, smart mining campus, and so forth. We will also support real-time broadband communications in terms of virtual augmented reality, mixed reality, and so forth. And that is what I am currently especially focusing on during this presentation. And beyond that, equally important, it is the support of integrated communication and sensing, which will be the most important use cases, also supported by 6G. Now, let's take a look at what I mean by RTBC. And I'd like to start for illustrating how explosive is the growth of VR AR in the next 2 to 3 years. It is taken for granted, but we can get from this picture that, yeah, we are already enjoying those services. So if you happen to be in South Korea, 5G monetizes, especially through an offering of VR at 4K, and those are basically the bands and the latency supported by the current 5G deployed system, in especially non-standalone configurations. So from this year onwards, we will have capability in the field of supporting 300 megabits per second, reduced latency down to 15 milliseconds, which means we will be also capable of carrying along a resolution of 8K. For then by 2023, maybe 25, we will reach out truly an ideal full immersive experience in terms of augmented and virtual reality or mixed reality. So today we are pretty much still here where we are after our handheld devices, 2, 3, 4 smartphones, each of us, and what we are expecting now to move towards the concept of the digital twin. I no longer want to wear any kind of device, and possibly what I wear has to be extremely cheap, and I will show you how we intend to achieve that. But in particular, I want to have an experience and make use of the digital twin, an experience that practically I have just consolidated some of the recent white papers coming out from Microsoft. This is an example of HoloLens 2. We are now thinking of going beyond to integrate directly a 5G connectivity into the goggles. So here already we are assisting over plenty of possibility and use cases. So we are having mixed reality for manufacturing. We also have mixed reality for healthcare and also for retailers thinking of a digital marketing type of offering. So today we have already plenty of applications, and looking at the capability of the 5G, 5.5G, and later with introduction of 6G, we could also shift and enjoy much more complex and immersive services such as virtual reality for socializing, and also virtual reality applicable to any kind of possible industry. And above here, just have some examples. Integrated communication and sensing comes along with that. So it's not just about integrating now what you can capture with your glasses. I'm thinking of now that the next step is really to integrate and augment what you see, what you enjoy, but also what you make use of from other sources of data, sensing type of information. And here you may see how we can integrate the uplink stream received from drones. That requires to provide a sky coverage of around 300 meters. It's a requirement from the standards. In order to have those services, you need to have an uplink speed, which is quite challenging and unachievable with 4G, by the way, of more than 50 megabits per second. And the latency, due to the controlling actions, uplink, downlink has to stay below 50 milliseconds. So we have a number of new use cases, and a fundamental enabler is definitely to have the regulatory, so the right regulatory in standardization in framework, so that we can go through all the current barriers and come along with an ecosystem and platform that support plenty use cases and applications. So our predictions below are in terms of the connected objects, UAV, and it's a UAV in this particular case, and the market size. We are estimating by 2025 to reach and connect more than 50 million type of devices, attempting tapping on a market of more than 80 billions, which, by the way, is smaller than the that what we are expecting by bringing gamings on a cloud age platform. The other user scenario is about uplink-centric broadband communications. And a characteristic of the new radio is to dramatically increase the speed from the devices to the network. That allows us to do many things and play with many categories of IoT connections. Here you have example of different IoT scenarios in terms of deployment requirements and the coverage requirements. So for the industrial IoT, we usually tend, and we need practically to deploy a private network. It has to be really trustworthy and reliable, 5 nines and more. And typically we have a private system, or it is an offering that we achieve through network slicing end-to-end, and at the age where we could really meet the performance in terms of latency. Massive IoT requires large coverage areas, and here I think it will really fly when we will integrate our access network, currently cellular, with the satellites. Satellites coming now in release 17, looking back at my roadmap, and that will be also an access, not as a backhauling, but access. So my device at 2 gigahertz will be capable to communicate via satellite, and also I could increase the bandwidth by using other type of devices, specifically targeting a satellite type of communication that could be installed on larger platforms. But with the satellite, definitely, we will achieve a complete coverage of the Australia and the global. And then we have other type of IoT and applications. And on the right here, you may see what kind of system capability you need to have in place to meet those the requirements of the particular users scenario. Today we are here, no problems for broadband IoT offering. We support nice 100 to 1 gigabit per second. And then later with the announcement of 5G, we also think of integrating other type of application and industrial IoT, but also for critical IoT. So bringing the IoT to the critical infrastructures. Requirements of the service application in order to enable business to consumer, business to the home, households, and business to business in terms of a wholesale offering are represented on this slide. So today we are pretty much here. I mean, we do have an excellent capability in place. We can't complain about that. But if you would like to achieve more and really have an ideal type of experience and many more service applications on top, we need to further enhance the system, because as you see here, the characteristic of those service applications demand for a much higher bitrate reductions of latency. And in particular, when you want to deal with the vertical sector, you need to be 100% about 5.269 reliable. So you cannot miss out a connection or have a problem in the service if a robotic platform is connected. Now, I would like to show you the concept quickly on the Cloud X, Cloud XR, because I think this is definitely the killer application. And in particular, it is what Australia should have in place to create many jobs and say allow plenty of new opportunity among a number of sectors. The Cloud X, what is it? What am I talking about here? So let's try to understand. There's also a position what the earlier speaker discussed earlier on a 5G infrastructure. So 5G here, I have reduced to 3 main blocks. You do have a base stations where you access the services through wireless, and it has to be wireless, the connectivity in the future, because we need to have an element of mobility. Even the robots are moving within a factory. So it has to be wireless. And the wireline has to be only for backhauling. So the access, I repeat, has to be wireless. We may discuss whether it is wireless cellular, wireless satellites. My answer is both of them. Said this, then we have the core network that basically takes care of the establishment of the communication, mobility, security, anything and everything, so that the system, the communication is maintained end-to-end. And then you have the devices. The devices currently we are talking about the CPUs, which has the element that you put at a home and allows you to connect the 5G services. And then you have your devices that communicate through this new box or new modem using the Wi-Fi, example Wi-Fi versus 6, otherwise you deteriorate the services the 5G may support. What we are targeting now with the organization listed on this slide is to integrate the 2 things. So we have a possibility of further enhancing the HoloLens with a direct support to the 5G services, and allowing us to move beyond a simple Wi-Fi coverage. Okay, now, what can we do here? So why do we need a 5G? So I've already explained, 5G brings us speed, latency, reliability, security, and privacy at the very service level. And that is fundamentally important, because the pipe connecting these 2 endpoints will be simply invulnerable. Now, what is key here? It is that why the 5G and not 4G? Because your latency reduced, and reliability, and especially the speed, will allow us to move all those key functionalities currently implemented at the edge. You may think of the rendering capability, you may think of a tracking, recognize objects capability, and so forth, to shift them from here to the edge. So we want to bring them all here using the multi-axis computing platform, which is currently meant to be integrated with the 5G communication system starting from already as 17. Fantastic. You may think of a 5G now, that the 5G core network will be enhanced to support the interfaces between the multi-axis edge computing platform and the end user device within the stack of the 5G protocol, therefore making this system extremely reliable, robust, because you see here, if you think of introducing a platform close to the edge of the network, you may have plenty of vulnerability and evasion from both sides. We don't want to see this. Therefore, we will enhance the 5G system to support the multi-axis edge computing. And on top of this, we will bring all the service applications. And in this particular scenario, I'm presenting what will be about the Cloud XR, Cloud Edge. That's the platform we will have at the edge in communication with the user plane function that has to be modified, the 5G system. And above that, we will have plenty of applications. This is just an example of virtual reality and augmented reality, where the capability of rendering are currently extracted for the devices, make them extremely cheap, extremely performing, light, perform at the edge, integrate together with interaction servers, and then we may complement them with many other applications, AI, analytics, and in particular, what we think here is to introduce the secondary security dimension, which ranges from authentication, encryption, integrity, and authorization that could be done simply on top, in addition to supporting the AKMA functionality, which is a way that the 5G authenticate the applications running on the multi-axis edge platform. The offering will become scalable, will meet all the requirements you may find within the government initiative in Australia. You may think of the 5G innovation initiative, the modern manufacturing initiative, and as of 10 days back or a week or so back, the requirements coming within the digital economy strategy Australia. So that's definitely the platform we need to have in place in this country, so that we can enable plenty of jobs and really transform the way we live, the way we work, the way we have fun, and the way we are really learning. So we need to start from smart education and training with a fully immersive experience, because what we remember mostly are through images, interactions, not much reading, books. This is just, you can't remember that. Today you will remember me that I'm moving my hands, so that I have my hologram. You won't remember this, it is written on the slide. That's why the first application will be definitely on smart educations and training, so that we can represent things like electromagnetic fields or explore things we cannot touch, but we could play with the hologram type holographic rendering. And then beyond that, I think we need to bring those applications to smart manufacturing, tapping on the modern manufacturing initiative. Healthcare, you see also the massive investments the government is placing on aged care. And then I'm thinking of digital marketing. Here you have an example of how we would like to achieve the marketplace. Marketplace means an ecosystem digitalized where the customer or the end user, being the customer, consumer, or tenant coming from the vertical sector, we simply access those services through subscription. That's why we want to achieve a marketplace. Practically, ultimately, I think ultimate goal here is to achieve the vision, which I already published back in 2015, because our ultimate goal, it is about shifting from the current Internet of Things to the Internet of Intelligence. So just to conclude, I think that the capability and possibility and ability we are having now of bringing together the devices that, as I said, will become cheaper, will become simpler, will become capable of receiving video streaming, but also capable of performing the same tasks using much less energy, as all this intelligence will go to the edge cloud. The second element, we need to have a 5G wireless. So we need to have a wireless absolute infrastructure that meets those technical performance requirements, especially in terms of speed. So as I said, we need more than 100 to up to 20 gigabit speeds, and then latency, we need to go down below 10 milliseconds, reliability 5, 9, and so forth. And then beyond that, we need to come along with our multi-access edge computing platform on which we will install, run plenty of service application that we will target to offer as a scalable marketplace where you may find many benefits. Some of those are illustrated on this slide. Benefit to the end user, because I will really, truly have time to consume services, and not like today, like my son last night spent 4 hours to install on his desktop a game. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to have everything running on my edge platform and just access that as a video streaming, uplink signal, just simple commands. Benefit to the device suppliers, we target to have an ecosystem, price will go down, and we will have the possibility of a large adoptions of each elements. And benefit to the application service provider, as there will be plenty of applications accessible through a single marketplace. The benefit, of course, for the operators, they will finally have an argument to say, hey, I'm not only your bit pipe, I'm not only bringing you connectivity, but I finally have my capability in place to play the role of an aggregator, or even think of offering specific services. So thank you so much. That's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. And on the slide set, I have integrated with a few of my recent public talk and presentations, where you may go deeper in any of the directions I attempted to mention today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, David. I don't know that for many of us, going deeper at this time would be the first words that would come out of our mouths, but an excellent session, and highlighting, I guess, your absolute depth of knowledge in this topic, David. Thanks everyone for listening into that session. We are going to move on to some Q&A now. David, I wouldn't know where to start with Q&A for your topic, honestly. I've followed a lot of technologies, but there is so much to this emerging space of wireless connectivity and the XR experience, and IoT and edge computing. Incredible. Does anyone have any quick questions for David there? We will be making this recording available to members, and if no one has any big questions, what I'm going to do is just wrap up the session and then move across to the virtual lounge. David, I don't know your commitments, but would love you to come in and have a chat about some of those things. Robert, also, would be wonderful if you could join us across in the virtual lounge. Does anyone have any quick questions? Eddie, I've been watching the chat mostly. Did you see anything that came up that I may have missed?
I didn't, I think. Questions, just comments.
There was one great question by Nathaniel from Dawalinu in WA, and that's when's 5G coming to Dawalinu. Not first is the answer, Nathaniel, but it is coming. I guess that's the challenge, isn't it, David, to ask one question, and that one question would be, can you briefly talk about the range and the ability to shift the spectrum in terms of intensity and frequency? Because I know that as each of these Gs comes along, the range for the tower seems to be dropping from 50 kilometres to 7.5. What are your thoughts about reaching remote areas in Australia?
So to reach out the remote areas here in Australia, but also in other places, I'm thinking of Philippines and so forth. The first thing, an approach could be to go down in frequency. So we need to have larger cell ranges. And here I do welcome the refarming of the spectrum at the 800 and 900 megahertz. Of course, that particular frequencies, we cannot enjoy extremely high speeds. So we will have megabit speeds, but I think in most of the places here in Australia, we hardly have a chance to access the internet. That would allow us to enjoy with, of course, some limits, internet services, have good phone calls, sort of maybe with very low resolution streaming services. And then we may think of a different type of deployments. And here, I'm thinking of reusing the spectrum that has been allocated already for the access that is in the C-band, so around the 3.5 gigahertz plus minus, and our carriers in Australia, I think they are capable of having in place, maybe not contiguous, but aggregating around 180 from 80 to 100 megahertz spectrum. And that would definitely boost peak speeds of gigabit per second. As I said here, I had a chance to download at the 350 megabit per second. So the question will be then to use these resources for an integrated access and backhauling, so we can extend the cell range by, say, reproducing, transporting the signal, using the resources for access, but also for backhauling. And then what I think, looking at the future, I think an Optus and NBN very active into that is the integration of the 5G communications, not only using, say, terrestrial type of access, but thinking of the satellites. Satellites are coming, and what I am advocating for are not the geostationary satellites, because that do not make the requirements in terms of latency. There's no way you can play with an interactive platform through geostationary satellites, because you know that the latency has to stay below certain thresholds, and the speed of the light is anyway a constraint. So I'm thinking of the LEO, so that the low Earth orbiting satellites, which are in the range from, if I remember correctly, 300 to 1,500 kilometers, with a footprint of 300 to more than 1,000 kilometers, which would allow us truly to integrate and bring the 5G services all over the places in Australia. So there are other things we can do, but that's what I would invest in. So if I would start my organization, I would go to the LEO satellites or other approaches. Yeah.
So, I mean, David, just to wrap, and we do need to do that. I know that if I unlocked your brain, that there'd be a lot more information coming out. I mean, the three takeaways from your previous discussion were those of us that aren't fully learned keep thinking of the next G as just faster, but 5G is very much about flexibility around spectrum intensity and therefore related bandwidth and latency and range. And I think the other thing that is the takeaway is that 5G is not mobile phones. Our traditional thinking around 2G, 3G, 4G was their mobile handsets. It's not mobile, it's any device, and it's a communication mechanism. But David, it's been lovely to have you on with us. Robert, thanks again. And if there was some more time, we'd come to Q&A, but I'd surely like to ask you to come back and talk about some of the more practical things we could be doing around security as Microsoft partners. And Paddy had to unfortunately move on to another session. If I would just be able to remind people, here in ANZ, we're one of about 100 chapters for IAMCP. Please do, via LinkedIn, probably as a first port of call, reach out to any of those you see on the committee there. And thanks to all of those that have joined us today. I'd like to share a big thanks to Lenovo and Edith and James and Michael, who's the Australian Regional Manager, for both hosting me here at Lenovo today, because I was travelling as part of the IAMCP engagement, but also for their strong support in helping us build the community. And again, just a reminder, to our current members that are here and prospective members, we do enjoy the support of a number of vendors. So I'd like to say again, thank you everyone for coming. It would be fantastic if you're able to join us. I shared the link for the virtual lounge in the chat, so feel free to click on that. It will throw you over to another Teams meeting and you will leave here. Do check out, in closing, I'll just show you a couple of things quickly in my browser. You will see that there is Social 27, and this will be used ongoing. The quarterly partner briefing runs every quarter, although during Inspire, because it's a Microsoft partnered event, we do collaborate with them around that. So our next event won't be until October, November. In here, you'll see there's a significant lineup of incredible speakers. There's a range of amazing sessions running, and when you've logged on, you can see all those sessions. Those sessions will be running, and you can set it to your own time zone through till the next 12 to 18 hours. So feel free to jump on, have a look. You'll see here I've got the link to the lounge, but here, based on your interest that you set, it may point out a number of other sessions that are there. In terms of finding out more about IAMCP, jump onto LinkedIn. We have the IAMCP ANZ company or organisation. We're obviously sharing information there as we go down the establishment phase. And if you do want to join and become a member, jump onto iamcp.org. It's only $100 US to become a member. Before the end of the year, we aim to be incorporated here in Australia and to be able to offer membership in Australian dollars, but great opportunity to get on board, become part of the community and participate in the 4 pillars of partner to partner, advocacy, community and education. And obviously a key part of our focus is around diversity and inclusion. So thanks again, everyone. I look forward to those of you that can join us in the lounge to jumping over, and those that have to move on. Appreciate you joining us, and have a great afternoon, evening, morning, or wherever you may be. Thanks again.